Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through a set of massive iron gates, the kind that creak as though they've held centuries of secrets. The air is warm, perfumed faintly with rose water, and there is velvet draped along the archways, catching the torchlight in folds of shadow and gold. You can almost hear the echo of slippers against marble, faint and careful, as if the people who once walked here understood that every sound mattered. This is not just any doorway. It is the entrance to Topkapi Palace, the great Ottoman seat of power. And behind these gates lies the most whispered of realm in all the empire, the harem. You step inside, and immediately the weight of history settles on your shoulders like a heavy cloak. The walls themselves feel alive, carrying stories in every stone, and though you are here centuries too late, you can still sense the lingering hush of voices. You probably wouldn't survive long here unless you had perfect posture, impeccable manners, and just the right glance that could charm an emperor. The truth is, the harem was both dream and prison, velvet and iron, luxury and fear woven tightly together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. I love knowing these stories drift across the world while you prepare for rest. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander deeper, tracing your fingers along cool marble, passing through shadowed courtyards and narrow corridors. The scent of jasmine lingers as though it's been soaked into the walls for centuries. This was where new arrivals girls from across the vast Ottoman Empire would first enter, carrying little but the clothes on their backs and the weight of uncertain futures. Some came willingly, hoping for fortune. Others came as tribute, their lives reshaped by politics rather than choice. The velvet gates, which look so grand from the outside, now feel like the mouth of a labyrinth. Historians still argue whether the harem was primarily a gilded cage of control or an institution of education and opportunity. Some point to the strict rules, the constant surveillance, and the limited freedom. Others argue that women here often became some of the most powerful figures in the empire, shaping politics behind veils and whispers. You pause in the hallway, listening to the faint echo of debate in your own head, wondering if both can be true. Ahead, the path splits, one corridor leading toward chambers filled with laughter, another toward silent rooms where secrets clung to the shadows. The velvet gates may have opened easily enough, but leaving them was another story entirely. The harem was less about desire than about discipline. Every step inside was measured, every word weighed. Even now, you feel yourself adjusting your breath, softening your steps, as though some unseen gaze is still watching. And maybe it is the ghosts of countless lives that pass through here, leaving behind only stories, secrets, and echoes for you to follow tonight. You move deeper into the palace, and the silence here feels different, alive, almost deliberate, as if the very marble wants to keep its secrets. The walls are pale and polished, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Every whisper seems to bounce, multiply, and fold back upon itself, until it feels like the building is speaking. You walk slowly, careful not to let your footsteps echo too loudly, because in these halls, sound was both currency and danger. You imagine the women of the harem moving here centuries ago, slippers brushing against the floor, their voices lowered to a hush. Every word mattered. A compliment whispered in one ear might rise to the Sultan himself by dawn. A careless joke could bring ruin. Gossip traveled faster than the river outside, and the marble walls carried it everywhere. You pause and almost hear it, the faint trill of laughter, the murmur of secrets, the sighs of longing hidden behind veils. Historians still argue whether the harem should be seen as a prison or as a society within a society. Some describe these halls as suffocating, filled with fear, where women were trapped behind endless rules. Others insist the harem offered its members education, comfort, and even paths to immense influence. You trail your hand along the cool marble and realize both versions live in the echoes. To one woman, the hallway meant confinement. To another, it meant a staircase toward power. The soundscape in your mind grows richer. The shuffle of silk robes, the tinkling of jewelry, the low voices practicing poetry or prayers. At night, when lamps flickered low, whispers grew bolder, stories of home, rumors of the Sultan, even forbidden tales of love. And when the moonlight fell through lattice windows, the marble itself seemed to shimmer with secrets too delicate for daylight. You turn a corner and glimpse a long colonnade stretching into shadows. For a moment you feel small, like a child wandering through a forest of stone. Every column looms tall. Every arch feels like a gateway into silence. It is both soothing and unsettling, like walking inside a dream where nothing dares to speak too loudly. You take a breath, and even that feels like it echoes. And then, you catch something, a whisper too faint to understand, a ripple of sound, like two voices leaning close. Perhaps it is only your imagination, or perhaps these halls really do remember. You smile softly. Either way, the marble does what it always did. It holds the whispers of lives both tender and terrible. Carrying them forward into your own ears tonight, the whisper fades as you step further down the hall, and suddenly the air grows heavier. You find yourself in a wide chamber, its floor covered with rugs brought from distant lands, its walls painted with patterns of tulips and crescents. This is where the newest arrivals would first be brought, the young women gathered from every corner of the empire, each carrying her own story, each about to be rewritten by the harem's velvet rules. You pause and imagine the scene. A caravan arriving at the gates, camels unloading bundles of silks, and among the cargo, veiled figures stepping down with hesitant grace. Some were daughters of noble families, sent as tokens of alliance. Others were captives from wars, their lives exchanged as part of the empire's spoils. A few came voluntarily, hoping to find fortune or favor within these walls. All of them, though, felt the same tension. This was not just a change of home, but a change of destiny. Historians still argue whether the women of the harem were truly powerless, or whether they wielded influence in ways less visible. Some point to the tragic stories of those who faded into obscurity, never chosen, never remembered. Others highlight the remarkable figures who rose from obscurity to become queen mothers, shaping the empire with decisions whispered into a sultan's ear. You glance across the rugs, and it is as if you can see both truths at once: the quiet sadness of the forgotten and the fierce brilliance of those who learned how to bend fate. The air in the chamber smells faintly of spices: cinnamon, cardamom, saffronage, if to remind the new arrivals that they were now at the center of a world that spanned continents. You hear the rustle of silks as the women settle on cushions, waiting for instructions, their eyes darting between guards and matrons who watch them closely. Some clutched trinkets from home, a scarf, a ring, a memory that tethered them to the lives they had lost. Others stared straight ahead, already rehearsing the mask of obedience that survival required. You linger in the corner, unseen, and watch as they exchange glances, fearful, curious, sometimes even daring. You imagine the sound of their languages mingling, Arabic brushing against Greek, Slavic phrases carried alongside Persian verses. In this room, diversity was both richness and division, unity and rivalry. The rugs beneath your feet feel softer than clouds, but to the new arrivals, they might as well have been chains. The harem was beautiful, yes, but beauty can also be a form of captivity. And as the doors close behind them, you realize how final that sound must have felt. You exhale slowly, the image of veiled figures still vivid in your mind. Each arrival was the beginning of another story, some tragic, some triumphant, all woven into the tapestry of the empire's hidden heart. You step into a smaller courtyard where moonlight slips through latticework and paints the flagstones in delicate squares. Here, the palace breathes more softly. You can almost hear the system purr because the harem was not simply rooms and veils. It was a living hierarchy of silk, stitched with ranks, titles, and rules so intricate you could spend a lifetime learning them and still forget which bow belonged to which superior. You pause beneath a carved arch, and the structure begins to unfold for you like a fan. At the base were the Kuris, the newcomers, the untrained girls whose first tasks were humble, carrying water, folding linens, tending braziers, and learning to walk as if the floor itself were listening. Above them stood the odalisks, attendants attached to higher-ranking women. They were the shadow and the hand, managing combs and cosmetics, sorting letters, remembering who liked rose oil and who preferred orange blossom. From there, the silk ladder climbed into the realm of the favored, the Gizdi, the noticed,
Women who had caught a single glance from the Sultan, and the ill fortunate ones whose visits were repeated enough to be recorded in whisper.
At the summit, gleaming like a moon in the night sky, stood the Haseki Sultan. The Sultan's chief consort, and above even her distant gravitational, was the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, whose authority could tilt the palace like a tide. You take another step and feel the system tighten the way a corset draws breath into elegance. Nothing here was accidental. Ranks managed conflict before it boiled. A Kari did not cross a Gizdi. An Odalisk did not contradict a Kalfa, one of the senior stewards who ran the domestic spine of this world. Everyone answered to someone, and that someone often answered to a quiet woman with a seal and a calm voice, who answered to another with a larger seal and an even calmer voice. It was paperwork and perfume, ink and rosewater, bureaucracy scented with jasmine. A mainstream fact settles gently beside you. During the 16th and 17th centuries, a period sometimes called the Sultanate of Women, figures like Harems Sultan Roxolana and Kaxim Sultan leveraged these ranks to shape imperial policy. Their influence was not a rumor, but a rhythm. Edicts swayed, appointments shifted, alliances bent. You imagine a minister, stern at dawn, softer by dusk, after an afternoon of polite suggestions conveyed through velvet channels. The harem's hierarchy was not a ladder to the sultan alone. It was a network that reached into the empire's bones. Then a quirky detail drifts past like a silk ribbon, the language of objects. In a place where words had sharp edges, a handkerchief could be a sentence. Fold meant yes, another meant no. A corner scented with clove suggested impatience, while rosewater hinted at grace. A sprig of basil could whisper favor, a pomegranate seed fertility, a ribbon's color rank or mood. You picture a girl rehearsing an entire conversation with a tray of small things, safer than speaking, more precise than guessing. And somewhere over coffee foam, an older attendant reads fortunes in the crescent of grounds at the cup's bottom, murmuring, "Not tonight, wait." You smile. Even bureaucracy needs superstition to keep its courage. Along the gallery, you notice doors with different carvings. Behind one, the Ustad, the masters among women, keep the schedules that ruled this court of silk. Bathing, lessons, audiences, rehearsals. Behind another, the Kalfatali cloths and jewels with an accuracy a treasurer would envy. There is a temptation to call it a prison, but you feel the hum of a school. The harem taught. Music, poetry, calligraphy, embroidery, court etiquette, the dance of conversation that could glide around a direct question and still arrive at the answer. A girl might enter knowing only her village songs and leave able to sing a gazel that made courtiers close their eyes. Near an inner gate stands a shadow of midnight authority, the Kisler Akosk, the chief black eunuch, whose keys were not only metal but metaphors. He managed the thresholds what and who crossed, when and why. Beside him, elsewhere in the palace, the Kapi Akosk, chief white eunuch, controlled other corridors of state. If the Valide Sultan was the moon, these men were the tide charts, marking safe passage through waters that looked calm and hid currents. You soften your steps instinctively in their imagined presence, the way one does in libraries and near very large ledgers. Historians still argue whether European travelers exaggerated the harem's scale and sensuality, turning dozens into hundreds, rules into fantasies. Some memoirs read like fever dreams of men who never got beyond the outer gate. Others, more careful, count names and stipends. Noting that this was a regulated household with salaries, ranks, and annual audits, a palace department wrapped in velvet. You tilt your head, listening to the debate echo. The truth, as always, seems to live between chandelier and ledger. This place was both emblem and engine, symbol and office. You lean over a balustrade and watch a rehearsal unfurl in the courtyard below. A music teacher plucks a line on the oud. A girl repeats it, falters, tries again. Another practices a bow so subtle it could mean gratitude or polite refusal, depending on the angle of her eyelashes. In a corner, two odalisks arrange trays for a small reception. A silver cup turned a quarter to the left. A sugared almond placed at 11 o'clock on the plate. A napkin folded into a lily. Precision is a form of survival, beauty, a form of negotiation. A breeze sneaks through the mashribia screen and cools your skin. You imagine promotions happening not in public hurrahs but in quiet acknowledgments. A slightly richer brocade, an extra pearl at the earlobe, a better view from one's window. Advancement here looked like a new comb, a heavier sash, a closer seat to a woman whose shadow could alter the map. If a sultan's glance was lightning, the valide's nod was sunrise. There is comfort, oddly, in the predictability of it all. You can feel your shoulders drop as the system's logic settles in. In a world of uncertainty, rank was a railing to hold. A girl learned whom to greet first, which corridor to avoid, how to say yes without saying yes, and how to file a complaint that sounded like gratitude. She was clever. She learned how to travel upward on soft feet, letting silk do the shouting. You pause at the threshold of another doorway and look back across the courtyard. The hierarchy hasn't vanished. It never does, but it has softened under the moonlight. The titles sound less like chains, more like roles in a theater whose play ran for centuries. Some actresses became famous, their names stitched into statecraft. Others played one scene and disappeared. Both were real. Both were necessary to keep the velvet machine turning. A bell chimes somewhere distant, one small note that seems to close a ledger. Lamps are lowered, voices hush. You let the architecture finish its lesson. In this place, power dressed as etiquette, ambition spoke as courtesy, and destiny wore silk shoes so it wouldn't wake the palace. You breathe in rose and ink, and step back into the corridor, aware now that every rank, every ribbon, every nod was a thread in the tapestry you're following through the night. The air thickens with the scent of rosewater and musk as you move into a quieter wing of the palace. Here, in chambers painted with delicate flowers and lined with silk cushions, you sense the hum of practice, of study, of lessons whispered by candlelight. For though the harem is often imagined as a place of languid waiting, the reality was sharper. The concubines were schooled in the arts of charm, and charm here did not mean only beauty, it meant the ability to bend the air of a room, to lace a word with meaning, to pour a cup of coffee so gracefully that a sultan forgot the bitterness. You pause near a doorway where a group of young women sit cross-legged, their heads tilted toward a teacher strumming a lute. The melody drifts like a feather, sometimes faltering, sometimes soaring, while the students repeat each note, learning to let their voices float like incense smoke. In another corner, a writing master guides hands over parchment, teaching delicate Ottoman calligraphy. The letters twist like vines, each stroke a whisper of elegance, each curve a promise of refinement. Historians still argue whether this education was meant to empower the women or simply refine them into pleasing ornaments. Some say the harem functioned as a finishing school, giving young women tools to thrive in a court where intellect mattered as much as allure. Others insist it was training for display, a way to polish surfaces while binding freedom. You lean against the carved wood panel, listening to the argument play itself out in your head, wondering if the truth lies in the way the women themselves chose to wield these lessons. A quirky detail emerges from the hush: the art of coffee service. It was said that the way a concubine prepared and presented coffee spoke volumes about her poise. Too quick, and it suggested carelessness. It hinted at hesitation. The foam at the top, the angle of the cup, the way sugar was placed stall, were part of the performance. You smile, realizing that even the smallest gesture could ripple upward, catching the attention of those who mattered most. Nearby, a woman demonstrates the art of conversation. She asks a question that is not quite a question, tells a story that is not quite a story. The students giggle, realizing how subtlety can be more powerful than bluntness. Laughter here is soft, contained, like a secret kept between walls. And you, listening, begin to understand how charm was a kind of language, one that allowed these women to exist, to survive, even to thrive. In a place where every glance was measured, you wander past another room where silk fans are used in practice. Flick of the wrist and expression dismissal, intrigue, invitation. A fan opened quickly could mean impatience. Slowly, it could mean contemplation. Combined with a tilt of the head or the curve of a smile, it became an entire vocabulary. The harem was not simply a household, it was a stage, and every woman here learned her part with precision. The candlelight flickers, and the rooms grow hushed again. You imagine a concubine leaving her lesson, carrying with her not just the skill of song or script, but the weight of possibility. To master charm was to master a kind of power, subtle, fragile, but undeniable. And as you exhale, you realize that in this world, survival was not just about obedience. It was about learning when to sing, when to write, when to smile, and when to whisper, so softly the marble itself remembered. You drift further down the corridor and find yourself before a carved wooden door. Its surface is inlaid with mother view, glimmering faintly in the lamplight. And when you press it open, the air inside feels hushed, almost reverent. This is not a salon for music or dance. It is one of the hidden classrooms of the harem. The scent here is of parchment, ink, and beeswax candles. A reminder that even in a world defined by silken whispers, the written word still had its throne. You walk slowly among low tables where girls once bent over manuscripts. You can almost see them, heads covered with gauzy scarves, eyes narrowed in concentration as they practice their letters. Ottoman Turkish script curls across the page like vines growing over stone, each line demanding patience. A teacher, stern but patient, taps the parchment with a reed pen, correcting a flourish here, a misplace there. In this chamber, beauty lay not only in faces, but in the elegance of words. Historians still argue whether literacy was common among the women of the harem. Some suggest only a select few were given this privilege, usually those destined for higher positions. Others argue that many concubines, especially during the height of the empire, were educated broadly in literature, poetry, and even mathematics. You pause by an abandoned ink pot, the dried residue glinting faintly. Wonder how many women left this room carrying knowledge they were never supposed to have. And then, a quirky detail rises from the shadows. Lessons in astronomy. It is said that some women were taught to recognize constellations, not only as decoration for poetry, but as tools for understanding time, seasons, and fate. Imagine them stepping onto a balcony at night, veils fluttering, pointing out Orion or Venus while whispering lines of verse. In a world where so much was hidden behind walls, the sky was the one canvas they could all still share. Another corner of the classroom hums with recitation. Verses of the Quran flow softly, the rhythm steady, calming. Religious instruction was woven alongside poetry, shaping not only the mind but the spirit. And you, standing silently in the back, feel the cadence settle into your own breathing. A slow lull that seems designed as much for the soul as for the tongue. You trail your fingers along a bookshelf where volumes once stewed. Tales from Persia, epics from Arabia, maybe even translations of Greek philosophy. Books came here like contraband and treasure at once, carried across deserts and seas, their words becoming lanterns for those allowed to read them. You imagine a girl discovering a new poem, holding it like a jewel, whispering it to a friend during the quiet of the night. Knowledge here was both gift and rebellion. In another alcove, you picture a lesson in embroidery, not simply sewing flowers but stitching verses into cloth, turning fabric into a canvas for memory. A pillow might carry a secret poem, sash might hide a proverb meant only for the wearer. These hidden classrooms were not only about literacy, they were about embedding meaning into every detail of daily life. You step back, the room quiet now, only the smell of old ink lingering in the air. The hidden classrooms remind you that the harem was more than gilded captivity. It was also a school, a place where minds were sharpened even as bodies were constrained. You breathe slowly, and the image of veiled girls practicing calligraphy lingers like an echo in your mind. Gentle as a lullaby of ink and parchment, you leave the stillness of the classroom and drift into a darker corridor, one where the air feels heavier, tinged with something more dangerous than ink or rosewater. Here, the marble is less polished, the lanterns fewer, and the silence almost dares you to break it. You know instinctively this is where stories whispered the loudest, but were written nowhere the forbidden love stories of the harem. You pause near a lattice window, the moonlight slicing through in silver patterns. Imagine a concubine leaning here centuries ago, her gaze slipping past the gardens to the Bosphorus glittering in the distance. Did her heart ache for a home she left behind, or did it ache for someone forbidden, someone her eyes were never supposed to linger on? The harem was filled with rules, but love never cared for rules. Historians still argue whether such romances were common or rare. Some claim the harem was too tightly controlled, its guards too vigilant, its punishments too severe. Others insist that where there are humans, there are always secret glances, coded messages, and daring hearts. You rest your palm against the cool stone and think, perhaps both are true. Love may not have been common, but when it bloomed, it burned brighter for its danger. A quirky detail drifts into the story: the language of flowers. In Ottoman culture, blossoms were not just decoration, they were codes. A red rose slipped into a tray could mean desire. A sprig of basil whispered loyalty. A jasmine bloom pressed into a scarf hinted at longing. Imagine a young woman daring to tuck a flower into the fold of her veil. The way her heart must have thundered as she passed it along. And sometimes, the stories tell of forbidden ties, not with fellow women or servants, but with outsiders' guards. Messengers, even musicians. The corridors of Topkapi carried footsteps of many, and temptation hides best in routine. A passing smile, a brush of the hand, a note of music held just too long, these were sparks in a palace built to smother flames. You picture it now, two figures meeting in a shadowed garden, their words spoken in whispers, their eyes darting to the door, promise exchanged under torchlight knowing the risk. The harem's walls were high, but desire has always known how to climb. And though most of these stories ended in silence, a few survived as rumors, spreading like smoke beyond the marble gates. The moonlight shifts, and you step back from the window. The hush of the corridor wraps around you, filled with echoes of laughter, sighs, and hearts that once beat too quickly for their own safety. Love here was both gift and curse, sweet in its secrecy, bitter in its danger, eternal in the way marble remembers what lips never spoke aloud. You follow the corridor until the marble brightens again, and the air changes from clandestine to ceremonial. Somewhere ahead, music swells, strings brushed by careful fingers, a ney flute, drawing out notes so long and soft they seem to curve around the pillars. You step into a hall dressed for evening, carpets like fields of red and blue, low tables mirroring lamplight in their polished wood, bowls of sugared almonds waiting like tiny moons. Tonight is not an ordinary night. Tonight the palace gathers its attention into a single room because tonight is the Sultan's choice. The space hums with etiquette. Eunuchs move like shadows, adjusting a cushion by a finger's breadth, lifting a curtain an inch to alter the draft, testing a tray's balance as if it were a scale of justice. Beyond a screen you cannot pass, the women prepare. Hair combed until it shines. Silk sashes tied without a wrinkle, earrings chosen for the way they catch lamplight and send it back as a polite promise. You sense their training at work, every gesture measured, every step rehearsed, every glance an instrument tuned to the key of the room. The Sultan's entrance is not always fanfare. Sometimes it is a quiet shift in gravity. Conversation lowers, the ney grows softer, and heads bow in an almost tidal motion. A mainstream fact steadies in your mind. Sultans like Suleiman observed intricate court protocols that choreographed presentation and distance. Access was ritualized so thoroughly that even proximity became a kind of rank. Here, attention is a currency, distributed deliberately, audited by eyes that miss nothing. You find your breath matching the hall's calms low, contained a single candle in a windless room. The presentation unfolds like a play you know by heart yet have never seen. Small dance begins, no leaps or wild turns, just the kind of refined movement that whispers rather than shouts. Hands describe arcs the way calligraphy describes. Vowels precise, expressive, restrained. A girl pours coffee, and the room watches the foam settle like a final brushstroke. Other offers sherbet in a crystal cup, its color a petal in liquid form. The Sultan does not hurry. He lets the ritual frame the choice, because the ritual is the language everyone understands. Historians still argue whether nights like these were frequent or rare, formal or intimate, whether selection was an ongoing current or an occasional tide. Some writings paint a calendar of rotation. Others describe unpredictability, as if the palace itself inhaled and exhaled desire at intervals no clerk could file. You tilt your head, listening to the debate tug at the seams of the evening, and then let it go. The room itself persuades you that predictability and surprise were partners here. A quirky detail drifts forward on the steam of coffee, the handkerchief signal, in some accounts, the Sultan's slight gesture setting aside a particular cloth, or allowing it to falconvade preference with the softness of a sigh. No trumpet, no proclamation. Silk did the speaking. Other tellings, a dish favored, a poem answered. A question returned with a smile. These were the inklings that traveled faster than footsteps. Carrying into the back rooms before the music ended, you imagine a handkerchief lying where it wasn't before, and a dozen hearts learning a new tempo at once. You step near the edge of the screen, careful not to disturb the geometry of the hall. Across the partition, a girl whose lessons you witnessed earlier holds herself with the poised stillness of a note held just right. Her fan stays closed, her eyes lifted only when courtesy requires. She is not the richest dressed, not the brightest jeweled. But there is a steadiness in her posture that draws your gaze the way a lighthouse draws a ship. The Sultan notices steadiness. Empires do not rest well on fluttering hearts. The music thins to one instrument, the ney exhaling one long ribbon of sound. The choice, when it comes, is as quiet as a page turning. A head inclines, a eunuch moves, a curtain shifts like a blink. There is no clatter, no gasp, only the soft rearranging of air. You feel it before you see it, the way a thunderstorm is sensed before the first raindrop. The girl lowers her eyes. Not in shock, but in recognition of a script she's rehearsed beneath other lamps, other teachers' voices. The hall breathes out. The aftermath is choreography too. Those not chosen do not wilt. They return to rank and routine, to lessons and laughter not unkind. In the palace's arithmetic, favor today is not disfavor tomorrow. Currents change, moons wax and wane. You picture them removing earrings, folding silk, sharing sugared almonds in a room where the ceiling feels lower and friendlier. Someone makes a small joke about handkerchiefs, and the tension breaks like sugar under teeth. You smile, because even here, humor is the safest rebellion. You move as the hall empties, noticing the small edits to space the cushion indented where a decision sat. The coffee ring that will be wiped away before it can become history. The quiet restores itself with professional speed. Another mainstream note returns. The harem had ledgers and schedules, stipends and inventories, the administrative heartbeat of a great household. Choices as soft as silk rippled through pages as stiff as parchment. Someone will tally fabrics before moonset. Someone else will confirm that the lamps burned their allotment of oil. Romance lives here, but so does math. Beyond a final curtain, corridors branch toward a suite where lamps burn lower, where voices are fewer. You do not follow, because this story, tonight, is not about crossing thresholds, but about watching how thresholds are kept. You linger in the hall, where decisions thicken the air. And you feel how power prefers the softest choreography. A glance, a nod, a folded cloth. Historians still argue whether the Sultan's preference truly crowned a life or merely altered its verse. Some women rose like dawn after a single night. Others, chosen often, left only a footnote. Influence did not always match affection. The empire was a web. A strand quivered here, another faraway trembled too. And somewhere in this same palace, the Valide Sultan would measure the new pattern with the same calm that had measured so many before. The ney falls silent. A servant pinches a wick. Darkness gathers like velvet pooling in the corners. The last tray leaves. The last echo folds into marble. You stand very still and let the room settle. As water settles after a pebble sinks out of sight, the night keeps its balance. The palace keeps its secrets. It's in you, breathing in the faint sweetness of sherbet left in the air. Step back into the corridor, carrying with you the soft certainty that power here spoke in silken silence. You follow the quiet current of corridors until the stone breathes warmer, and the lamps burn lower, and the rugs thicken underfoot like moss. Here the palace turns inward. Curtains replace doors. Screens replace walls. The light is liquid, poured from little glass cups where wicks float in pools of oil. And the air carries a low perfume rose folded into amber, a thread of musk stitched through jasmine. You slow without thinking. These are the rooms behind the rooms. The spaces where the empire learned to speak in whispers. The chambers behind the curtains. The first veil parts with the sound of fabric exhaling. A small sitting room opens, tiled in blue, that remembers the sea. Pillows lean like clouds against the walls. Mangled brazier blushes with coals the color of pomegranates. Nothing here shouts. Every object is a sentence that ends softly. A tray waits, its silver dulled on purpose. so it won't catch the eye like lightning. An ewer glows faintly. Somewhere water answers with a quiet syllable, hammam pipes murmuring to themselves behind the tiles. A mainstream fact drifts in, steady as breath. The imperial harem at Topkapi held an entire suite of bath hammams for the Valide Sultan and for the women closest to power. Their domes pricked with glass eyes so moonlight could fall as stars onto steam. Picture the warmth, the scrub of silk keys mitts, the hiss of ladles against heated marble. Cleanliness here was ritual and rehearsal both. To step from bath to chamber was to step from reflection into performance. You feel the room's humidity even now, as though the walls remembered damp the way a singer remembers a note. Another curtain slips aside. This chamber is smaller, darker, its ceiling painted with vines, so the eye always has something gentle to follow. The furniture is an instrument. Low, rounded, designed to cut posture rather than scold it. A window of pierced stone amidst a thin beam of moonlight. Dust drifts in it like silver pollen. On a stand, a bottle of attar tilts its mouth toward patience. You imagine a hand reaching, pausing, choosing, rose to soothe, amber to steady, orange blossom to brighten. This was not glamour for spectacle, but for temperature scent, used like a musician uses pitch to tune the room. Historians still argue whether these inner arrangements were as intimate as later painters like to imagine. Some insist that European canvases, reclining odalisks, a casual disarray of limbs and lace were fantasies painted from the threshold, not the center. Others point to inventories and household records that itemize screens. Lamps, embroidered coverlets, and the precise number of towels as proof of a regulated, choreographed household rather than a scene of perpetual abandon. You let the debate pass like a curtained shadow. Even the argument feels drowsy here, unwilling to raise its voice. A quirky detail waits on the tray. Sherbet spoons of mother of pearl, cool on the tongue and silent in the bowl. Metal would clink, pearl merely sighs. You smile at the thought of silence designed into cutlery. Next to them, a slender nargileh leans like a cat, its glass belly catching two small stars. The hose is braided silk. The mouthpiece is carved from olive wood, so that the bite of fruit lingers against the lip. These are not props for decadence. They are instruments for slowness. The empire, for a few minutes, agrees to take its time. You stand by the curtain that leads farther in and listen, not for footsteps, but for arrangement. This is where the grammar of proximity becomes politics. How close a cushion rests to a seat is a paragraph. Whether a lamp burns at half height or full is an adjective. Which screen is left ajar is a verb that means perhaps. The harem's public halls spoke fluent protocol. These private rooms spoke fluent implication, a language of inches and soft corners. You find yourself reading it without trying. An open bottle is invitation. A folded shawl is deferral. A rose petal placed where a sleeve will surely brush it as a promise to be discovered later. A mainstream line returns to steady you. Contact with the Sultan was ordered, recorded, and remembered by officials whose pens were dry and calm. The inner life of the palace did not float entirely on scent and song. It rested on ledgers. Even nights that began behind curtains left ink behind them by morning lamps accounted for, trays returned, linens tallied. The day's mercy and favor converted to numbers that could be filed. You picture a clerk who has never crossed a single curtain, writing the night into columns that outlive everyone. Another small room after that, almost a pocket in the palace coat holds, a low toque couch, and a lattice window where outside voices soften into music. You think of the women whose lessons you watched earlier, the coffee ritual, the measured conversation, the calligraphy that made words look capable of floating. Those skills are furniture here too. A story told in the right shape cushions a moment. A poem recited at the right tempo dims a doubt. Question poured slowly into the room cools a temper like water on stone. Historians still argue whether a single night could make a life. Some biographies glow like comets chosen once. A woman becomes the great Haseki, mother of princes, axis of policy. Others are quieter. Years of service, 1 or 2 nights pressed between pages of routine. The record says both happened. Chamber says something gentler, that most lives are neither eclipse nor noon. They are lamplight, steady, warm, tending, warming enough. You notice the attendant's choreography even here on the room's edge. A eunuch sets a lamp exactly where the eye wants a star. Another leaves a jug to sweat a perfect ring on the tray. Someone will wipe it later, but for now it glows like a small moon. Two odalisks pass a gesture between them that looks like habit and is actually message. A shawl adjusted means not yet. A fan tapped means enter softly. A scarf smoothed across a cushion means this place is spoken for. The palace's most fluent literature was written in cloth. Second quirky thread, floating wicks in rosewater. In some rooms, the oil lamp sits in a shallow dish of scented water, so that any spill becomes perfume rather than flame, and the surface trembles with the motion of voices. A trained attendant could read whether a conversation was calm or sharp by watching the lantern's tiny sea. Imagine learning to tell fate from ripple. Imagine standing in the doorway, choosing a step by studying a bowl of light. You grin, quietly impressed. The Empire's best diplomats were perhaps gardeners of flame. You do not cross the final curtain. Not tonight. This story is not a trespass. It is a reading of edges, a slow tracing of how space itself can calm a pulse. Let your palm rest against the fabric. It is heavier than it looks, weighted so the fold falls with dignity. On the hem, someone has stitched a pattern of vines and pomegranates so small, it was likely made for the needle's joy alone. You think of the hands that worked it, the hours counted in blossoms, the way craft makes time gentle. When you turn back, the route you took seems to blur the chambers layer over one another like the pages of a dream. You can still pick out the notes. The Bath's breath on tile, the pearl spoon's quiet, the curtain's patience, the ledger's spine. If the outer halls were made of rank, these rooms are made of tempo. Power here does not advance with the march. It advances with the lullaby. The final veil lifts to the corridor's cooler air. Somewhere beyond, night rolls along the Bosphorus, and ships write brief sentences in lanterns upon the water. Servant pinches a wick. The lamp sighs out. You exhale with it, feeling the palace settle one candle lower. Behind you, secrets do not clamor, they rest, the way warm stones rest when the sun moves on. You walk away softer, carrying the certainty that what happened behind the curtains was not only the crossing of skin, but the management of light. Scent, distance, and time, a choreography of hush that let empires sleep. The corridor bends again, and the hush thickens until it feels like velvet on your shoulders. The air grows steadier, almost ceremonial, and you know without needing a guide that you are approaching the presence of someone whose shadows stretched longer than the Sultan's own. At the heart of the harem, higher than the Hasaki, brighter than the chosen favorites, there is a throne without a crown, the power of the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. You step through an arch where the marble softens into rugs, where cushions are plump, as clouds and lamps are hung so low they shine like moons caught in nets. This is not the chamber of a prisoner, but of a queen, cloaked in domestic disguise. The Validess apartments gleam with the authority of silence, the kind of silence that bends courtiers at the waist and keeps ministers awake at night. The air smells not of perfume, but of confidence, a blend of cedarwood, ink, and the faint sweetness of almonds served in golden dishes. A mainstream fact plants itself firmly before you, for over a century, from the mid-1500s to the 1600s. The Ottoman Empire experienced what later historians call the Sultanate of Women. During this period, valid sultans, such as Harem and Kaiksim, wielded astonishing influence, shaping policy, steering appointments, and even deciding wars. The empire's official seal might rest in a sultan's hand, but the warmth of the ink often came from a woman's whisper behind the curtain. You watch as attendants move through the valid's rooms like stars orbiting a planet. Eunuchs bow lower here, their keys clinking like wind chimes. Concubines stop to adjust veils, choosing every gesture with care. The valid does not need to raise her voice. Her presence is enough. You sense her listening, even in your imagination, the way the empire tilts slightly, like water in a bowl, each time she shifts her gaze. A quirky detail glimmers in the candlelight, the seal ring ceremony. It is said that the valid sultan kept a chest of rings, each engraved with symbols or words. When she wanted to send instructions beyond her chamber, she pressed one into wax. Not always with words, but with marks only her allies understood. A tulip could mean approval. A cypress, endurance. Star, urgency. Imagine an official receiving such a seal in the night, heart pounding at the symbol that might raise him or ruin him by dawn. Historians still argue whether the sultanate of women weakened the empire or kept it afloat. Some blame these mothers and consorts for intrigue and corruption, painting them as spider queens spinning webs that strangled politics. Others insist they preserved stability in times when sultans were young, distracted, or uninterested. You tilt your head, listening to the debate as though the marble itself is weighing both sides. Perhaps the truth lies in the shadows. Without these women, the palace might have collapsed under its own grandeur. Imagine a young concubine kneeling before the Valide Sultan, offering not just flowers or poems, but loyalty. The Valide's voice is calm, her eyes sharper than any blade. She asks questions that sound like kindness, but measure ambition. With a nod, she can raise the girl's fortune higher than the domes outside. With silence, she can consign her to obscurity. Power here is not noisy. It is velvet wrapped around iron. Beyond her audience chamber lies a gallery where gifts are stored, embroidered cloths, jeweled boxes, letters tied in ribbon. Some came from provincial governors eager to curry favor, others from foreign envoys who understood that an empire's true pulse might beat beneath a mother's veil. You step among these objects and realize they are less trophies than tools, each one a reminder that politics is built not only on armies, but also on affection, obligation, and memory. A soft wind brushes the curtains, and the lamps tremble. For a moment, you almost see her, seated on cushions, fingers heavy with rings. Eyes softened by age, but sharpened by years of watching men believe themselves the masters of her stage. She smiles not warmly, not cruelly, but knowingly. You bow instinctively, though you are only a guest, centuries too late. And you feel the weight of her power press down like the hush of night. The Valide Sultan's chamber reminds you that in the Palace of Whispers, some whispers were stronger than thunder. And as you step back into the corridor, you carry with you the truth that behind the silks and shadows, it was often a mother who ruled the empire's sleep. You leave the calm weight of the Valide Sultaness apartments and follow a narrower passage where the shadows seem to lean closer. The air tastes sharper here, laced with something metallic, as though secrets have their own flavor. You know instinctively you've entered the corridors of intrigue, the places where silk concealed daggers and honeyed words hid poisons. The harem's beauty was real, but so were its dangers. Every rivalry for favor, every tilt of power, carried the possibility of betrayal. You imagine concubines smiling across cushions, their eyes bright with charm but edged with calculation. Behind every gift could be a scheme, behind every polite phrase, a trap. The marble walls, once so soothing, now feel like ears pressed close to listen. Ready to carry rumors to anyone patient enough to hear, mainstream fact steadies you. Topkapi Palace was not only the Sultaness' residence, but also the administrative heart of the empire. Politics pulsed through its chambers, and the harem was part of that current. Intrigue here wasn't simply about affection, it was about influence that could ripple out to provinces and armies. A favored woman could elevate her family's fortunes. Fallen one could see her lineage erased. The stakes were higher than any jeweled crown could suggest. A quirky detail surfaces, whispered like a rumor carried on incense smoke. The use of sherbet as signal. In some tales, when the sultan wished to dismiss a concubine forever, a cup of sherbet laced with pomegranate was sent. Sweet on the lips, final in its message. In others, sherbet was merely a treat, but fear sharpened its taste. Imagine sipping slowly, wondering whether sweetness meant favor or farewell. You almost taste the anxiety on your tongue. Historians still argue whether tales of poison in the harem are exaggerations spun by outsiders eager to paint the Ottomans as exotic and sinister. Some say the stories of venom hidden in rings or drafts are myth, products of European imagination. Others point to sudden deaths, unexplained disappearances, and records scrubbed to clean, suggesting shadows where evidence once stood. You step carefully, feeling the echo of both possibility and paranoia. You pause in a small chamber where two eunuchs stand in your mind's eye, guarding doors not only with keys, but with knowledge. Their loyalty was to the Sultan and the Valide, but even their eyes must have flickered. When whispers thickened, you sensed the danger of silence more than sound, the way a withheld word can poison more efficiently than arsenic. In another corner, you picture concubines exchanging glances during a lesson, their smiles polite but brittle. A hand adjusts a sash, A fan closes too quickly. Tiny gestures speak volumes in this world. A single sigh at the wrong time could seed suspicion. The intrigue wasn't always poison in cups. Often it was poison in perception. You linger at the threshold of a chamber where shadows feel heavier. Perhaps it is only your imagination, but you picture a silver tray glinting faintly, a dish left untouched, a eunuch carrying it away with eyes lowered. The marble seems colder here, as if it remembers fear. The harem's beauty and peril lived side by side, silk stitched to shadow. And as you turn back to the corridor, you realize that every smile you saw earlier, every song, every dance floated on an undercurrent of rivalry. To survive here was to master charm, but also caution, to know when to sip and when to set the cup aside. You breathe out slowly, grateful that tonight you are only passing through. Your lips untouched by sherbet, your name safe from whispers, yet the taste of intrigue lingers, faint and metallic. As you step toward the next story, waiting in the palace's endless hush, the corridor opens into a long gallery where the windows arch high and narrow, letting in slivers of light like blades. Outside, you glimpse the Bosphorus, dark and calm, carrying ships whose lanterns blink like distant stars. But here inside, the true currents run not on water but through whispers, nods, and letters folded too many times to count. You have stepped into the realm of harem politics, the quiet machinery that could tilt the empire without ever leaving these walls. At first glance, it looks almost domestic. Women sit at embroidery frames, needles slipping through cloth as if nothing could be gentler. A pair of odalisks pour coffee, laughing softly over foam. Attendants sweep the marble so carefully that dust has no chance to live here. But beneath the calm, you feel the vibration of decision, the invisible tug-of-war between families, factions, and futures. A mainstream fact steadies your thoughts. The Ottoman harem was not only a household but also a political engine. Sons born here became princes, mothers became regents. Alliances were forged in the silken dark. The Valide Sultan's approval could elevate a vizier, while a concubine's fall could topple her family's fortunes. The empire was vast, but its heart was hidden here, behind veils and lattice screens. You hear echoes of a debate that has never ended. Historians still argue whether the harem's political role was exaggerated by Europeans fascinated by exoticism, or whether it truly functioned as a shadow government. Some point to records of stipends, appointments, and petitions addressed directly to powerful women. Others say the myth of endless intrigue served foreign imaginations more than Ottoman reality. You trace your hand along the wall and think perhaps both are true. Stories often grow from roots that were real. A quirky detail glimmers as you pass a low table. The gift economy. In this world, influence was measured not just in titles, but in the flow of objects. Jewels, spices, even small trinkets that carried symbolic weight. A ruby box might secure a hearing. Simple sprig of basil, placed deliberately, might signal favor. Nothing here was without meaning. Even the order in which trays of sweets were served could whisper allegiance. You pause to watch two women bend over embroidery. One stitches tulips, the empire's flower of prestige. The other stitches cypresses, symbol of patience and mourning. To any outsider, it's just decoration, but you sense the quiet message. A wish for endurance, a prayer for survival. The cloth itself becomes a petition, folded eventually into the layers of politics. In a corner, eunuchs confer in low voices, carrying sealed letters bound for distant provinces. You imagine the contents, recommendations, warnings, perhaps veiled commands, written in the calm hand of the Valide Sultan. Out there, beyond the palace walls, pashas and governors receive such letters and adjust their courses accordingly, never forgetting that the harem is listening. Politics here doesn't roar. It hums, like the string of a lute plucked just once, but vibrating long after. It hides in gestures, in the tilt of a lamp, in who is seated closer to the sultan during a reception. Even laughter can be political, if it is timed right. And you realize that the women here, though bound by walls, were not bound in silence. Their voices simply spoke in another register quieter, subtler, but no less powerful. You exhale slowly, taking in the hush. The gallery seems brighter now, though the lamps haven't changed. Perhaps it is the awareness that what looks still can actually be moving. The empire's pulse beats here. Beneath silks and sighs, steady as the tide outside the windows. And as you step away, you understand that harem politics was less about shouting orders and more about directing currents guiding ships, not with storms, but with whispers of wind. You leave the gallery of whispers and follow a path into quieter courtyards, where the lamps burn lower and the sounds of the palace soften. Here, away from the pulse of politics and ceremony, daily life unfolds with the rhythm of habit. The air smells of bread baking somewhere, of lavender tucked into cushions, of water dripping gently from a fountain hidden in shadow. Do you slow your steps? This is not the stage of empire, but the background hum that kept it alive, the daily life behind the walls. At dawn, the palace stirred with the call to prayer. Concubines rose from their mats, wrapped in thin veils against the morning chill. The hammam fires were stoked, and steam began to rise beneath the domes pricked with tiny glass stars. Laughter mingled with the hiss of ladles. Soap scented with olive oil carried through the corridors. Cleanliness was both ritual and necessity, the rhythm that kept bodies and spirits steady in confinement. A mainstream fact anchors your walk. The harem housed hundreds of women at its height, each with specific duties and routines. While favorites trained in music and etiquette, others spun silk, embroidered robes, or tended to the endless domestic tasks of a great household. You imagine a group bent over looms, weaving patterns so intricate they could hold your eyes for hours. Another group sorts spices, their fingers stained with saffron and turmeric. The empire's vastness lived here in miniature. Every scent, every fabric, every flavor gathered behind these walls. You hear a giggle in the air, and a quirky detail drifts close. Games of chance. In their hours of leisure, women played with ivory dice, backgammon boards, or even improvised games with pebbles. Wagers were rarely coins, they were favors, small tokens, sometimes even promises. A lost round might mean singing a verse aloud or serving tea to the winner. In the stillness of captivity, these games were sparks of unpredictability, ways to laugh at fate for a little while. Historians still argue whether life in the harem was suffocatingly monotonous or quietly rich with learning and companionship. Some depict endless boredom, women confined to rooms with nothing but embroidery. Others highlight the lessons, the friendships, the laughter that turn captivity into community. You stand in the courtyard listening, and realize both could be true depending on the day, the season, or the rank of the woman. To some, the walls were prison. To others, they were shelter. You follow the sound of footsteps to a dining chamber. Women sit cross-legged around low tables, their trays gleaming with copper dishes of lentils, pilaf, roasted lamb, and bowls of fruit that glitter like jewels. Bread is torn, not sliced. Coffee is poured, dark and thick, each cup held carefully to preserve the foam. The chatter rises and falls like the tide stories from villages far away. Complaints about stiff shoes, laughter over a clumsy dance lesson. You catch a phrase in Greek, another in Arabic, a third in Bosnian. The harem was a world within a world, stitched together by the empire's reach. After the meal, some retire to practice music, their voices drifting like smoke through the halls. Others sit by the latticed windows, embroidering tulips into sashes while telling stories to pass the time. A young girl yawns, curling up on a cushion with a kitten that has slipped in from the garden. In this moment, the palace feels almost ordinary, like a village magnified, with its own rhythms of work, leisure, and gossip. You lean against a column and breathe slowly, soothed by the ordinariness of it all. The politics, the danger, the rituals, those are real. But so are the games, the meals, the friendships. Daily life here was not just survival, was also living in whatever ways the walls allowed. And as the lamps dim and laughter fades into soft murmurs, you feel the harem's hidden truth settle around you. Even in captivity, life finds its rhythm, its joy, its small rebellions of laughter and bread. The hush of daily routine drifts away as you follow a staircase that twists upward, narrow and steep, until the walls feel close enough to hear your heartbeat. When you emerge, the air feels sharper, the silence heavier, as though this part of the palace has collected sighs rather than laughter. Here lie the echoes of rebellion, faint but persistent, carried by women who dared to dream of more than cushions and silk. You pause by a window grated with iron. Beyond it, the Bosphorus glimmers in the distance, ships gliding like shadows across water. Imagine standing here centuries ago, a concubine pressing her hands against the bars, heart pounding with longing for the world beyond. Some whispered of escape, others of vengeance, a few of simply refusing the rules that bound them. The walls were high, but human desire always searched for cracks. A mainstream fact settles like a stone. During the height of the Ottoman Empire, there were recorded instances of palace unrest plots not only among viziers and janissaries, but whispered rebellions within the harem itself. Women of influence sometimes orchestrated alliances, shifting loyalties among eunuchs and attendants to tilt the balance of power. And on rare occasions, defiance broke into daylight, as when the Valide Sultan or a favored consort openly clashed with court officials, shaking even the Sultan's authority. Then a quirky detail surfaces, almost like a rumor smuggled across centuries. Tales of women hiding messages in their embroidery. A seemingly innocent sash, once unraveled, revealed a letter stitched between layers of cloth. A pattern of tulips might conceal a plea, a vine of cypress, a warning. These were rebellions written in silk, small but dangerous threads, carrying risks sharper than steel. Historians still argue whether many women truly attempted escape from the harem, or if such stories were fables invented by later writers. Some insist that the walls were too thick, the guards too watchful, the punishment too severe. Others point to oral traditions that describe girls disguising themselves as servants or slipping notes to sympathetic eunuchs. The truth, like a shadow, shifts with the angle of the lantern. You imagine a group of women, gathered late at night, whispering plans while the lamps sputtered low. Their voices trembled between fear and courage. Perhaps they dreamed not only of escape, but of remaking their world of demanding choices and marriages, of controlling their own children's fates, of turning the whisper of rebellion into a shout. But when the doors creaked, when footsteps approached, the plans folded back into silence, hidden in laughter, disguised as games. Standing in this shadowed corner, you feel both awe and sorrow. Rebellion here was rarely loud, was usually quiet, fragile, like a candle flame trembling against the draft. Yet even a small flame leaves soot on the ceiling, a reminder that it once burned. The harem carries those marks still, faint but unforgotten. Stories of women who dared to say no even, if only in stitches, in sighs, or in silence, that refused to yield. You step away from the window, hearing the iron grate hum faintly under your touch. The echoes of rebellion are not gone. They linger like whispers carried by stone, reminders that even within silk walls, the human heart is never entirely still. The stairwell winds back downward, and as you emerge into a wide gallery, the palace seems to exhale. The air is gentler here, not tense with rivalry or intrigue, but filled with a different weight. Memory. 8. Lamps burn low, casting long shadows that ripple like silk across the walls. You have reached the end of your journey through the harem, and here in this chamber of echoes lies the legacy of silk shadows. You pause in the center, and the silence gathers around you like a cloak. The harem is gone. The women who lived here long buried, their names remembered only in fragments, their stories folded into chronicles and myths. Yet their presence lingers. Every carved arch, every painted tile, every marble stair remembers their steps. You can almost hear them laughter, sighs, songs, arguments all, layered together like threads in a tapestry, too vast, too unweave. A mainstream fact settles over you. The Ottoman harem lasted for centuries. From the rise of the empire in the 15th century until the 20th, shaping not only dynasties, but the very identity of the palace itself. It was not a single story, but thousands, some of power, some of sorrow, some of quiet endurance. The Valide sultans and consorts became legends, while countless others disappeared into anonymity, their lives written only in the stones. Then a quirky detail drifts in like a stray petal carried on a breeze. In later years, when foreign diplomats were granted glimpses of the abandoned chambers, they often found children's scribbles on walls, little sketches of birds, flowers, and boats. These were not the marks of queens or schemers, but of everyday life, the quiet humanity that survived even within the empire's grand machinery. You smile softly, realizing that history is not always written in ledgers. Sometimes it's written in chalk that refuses to fade. Historians still argue whether the harem should be remembered as a prison, a school, or a seat of power. Some insist it symbolized the oppression of women. Others point to the extraordinary influence wielded by its most powerful figures. The debate will never end, because history is not a single voice, it is a chorus of contradictions. You tilt your head, listening, and the marble seems to nod in agreement. You breathe in deeply, letting the scents of rosewater and musk, ink and coffee fade into memory. The legacy of the harem is not only in politics or intrigue, but in the ways women shaped their world despite the walls, through song, through wit, through gestures so subtle they could outlast dynasties. Their whispers became part of the empire's pulse, a rhythm still echoing through these stones. As you turn toward the last doorway, you carry that legacy with you. The harem's shadows were not only of confinement, but also of resilience. Behind veils and curtains, women carved space for influence, for survival, for meaning. Their silk was not weakness. It was armor, soft enough to comfort, strong enough to endure centuries. You step into the corridor one last time. The lamps dim further, the night outside thickens, and the palace exhales again, returning to its eternal sleep. You leave quietly, as though not to wake it, carrying with you the legacy of silk, shadows, gentle, mysterious, unforgettable. The journey slows now, the palace fading behind you as the night settles deeper. The air outside is cooler, carrying the scent of the Bosphorus and the faint salt of the sea. You walk softly along the shore, hearing the water lap like a lullaby against the stones. Above you, the sky stretches wide and calm, the stars steady as lanterns that never go out. Your breath matches the rhythm of the tide, in and out. The palace is only a memory now, its silks and shadows folded away, its whispers fading into the distance. What remains is calm, a gentle stillness that wraps around you like a warm blanket. The stories you've carried tonight settle into place, becoming softer, quieter, until they feel less like echoes and more like dreams. You find a quiet spot to rest, sitting on smooth stone warmed faintly by the day's sun. The water continues its slow song, steady and patient. Each wave draws you closer to rest. Each ripple feels like a hand smoothing the wrinkles of the day. The night is kind. It's asked nothing of you but to let go, to let your body sink into comfort, to let your mind drift where it will. The palace gates are closed now, the lamps dim, the curtains still. There is no intrigue left to follow, no whispers left to chase, only quiet, only calm. So you close your eyes, letting the world soften at the edges. The stars above fade into gentle darkness, the sea into silence, your breath into sleep. And in that sleep, the stories wait, ready to return when you dream again. Oh, sweet dreams.